He's the man who whispered "my precious" as Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, roared to life as the tragic King Kong, and gave Caesar in Planet of the Apes more humanity than most live-action heroes. Yet while peers like Christian Bale and Benedict Cumberbatch became household names, Serkis's groundbreaking work was too often dismissed as special effects. How can the actor who redefined performance itself still remain on the margins of Hollywood's A-list? This is Underrated Actors, the Andy Serkis story. Early roots, from stage to screen shadows. Andy Serkis was not born into the spotlight of Hollywood, but into the quieter world of British theater and television. In the late 1980s and 1990s, while future A-listers were already being groomed for star-making turns, Serkis was cutting his teeth on stage at the Royal Exchange in Manchester and performing in productions that demanded discipline, patience, and transformation. He studied at Lancaster University, originally intending to pursue visual arts, but a fateful turn toward acting shifted the course of his life. From the beginning, he was drawn to characters on the margins, complex figures, rarely glamorous, always human. On British television, he appeared in series like The Bill and adaptations, such as Oliver Twist. These were not headline roles, not the kind of parts that launch an international career, but they revealed something essential: Serkis's ability to vanish into character, to embody voices, gestures, and emotions so completely that the actor himself seemed to disappear. Even then, his gift was a double-edged sword. He was mesmerizing to watch, yet he rarely fit the mold of the leading man that television executives sought. Where contemporaries could coast on good looks or a suave presence, Serkis carried something different: a raw, transformative energy that resisted easy packaging. This outsider quality would become both his power and his curse. While Benedict Cumberbatch found fame through Sherlock's sharp intellect, and Tom Hardy carved a path with brooding charisma, Serkis remained in the trenches, delivering stellar performances in supporting roles that passed too quickly in the cultural memory. He was never the poster boy, never the glossy face studios could plaster on billboards. Instead, he was the actor you remembered without quite remembering who he was. And yet, those early years laid the foundation for what was to come. The skills he sharpened on stage, the control of voice, the attention to physical detail, the ability to channel emotion through the smallest gesture, would later make him the pioneer of an entirely new form of acting: performance capture. Without those years in the shadows, Serkis could not have redefined how we understand screen performance in the 21st century. But here lies the irony that defines his entire career. The very talent that set him apart, the ability to dissolve so completely into his characters, also made him invisible. Audiences would soon come to know Gollum, King Kong, Caesar, Snoke, but not Andy Serkis. Where other actors rose by being seen, he would rise by being hidden. And in that contradiction lies the essence of why Andy Serkis is one of the most underrated actors of our time. The genius everyone has witnessed, but almost no one has recognized. The breakthrough. Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, 2001 to 2003. When Peter Jackson set out to bring J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings to the screen, the character of Gollum was considered nearly impossible to realize. A creature torn between malice and fragility, with a voice like broken glass and eyes haunted by centuries of obsession, Gollum risked becoming a cartoonish distraction in an otherwise epic saga. Enter Andy Serkis, an actor who didn't just lend his voice, but his entire body and psychology to the role. Serkis approached Gollum not as a visual effect, but as a living, breathing tragedy. He studied patterns of addiction to capture the character's consuming obsession with the ring, experimented with guttural tones to create that now iconic rasp, and devised a physicality that conveyed both animalistic twitch and fragile humanity. His performance was recorded on set alongside Elijah Wood and Sean Astin, allowing the emotional tension between Frodo, Sam, and Gollum to be authentic, not animated after the fact. Gollum was no mere CGI creation. He was a fully realized character whose pain and duplicity rivaled the flesh and blood actors around him. Reviewers from outlets like the New York Times and The Guardian hailed Serkis as the invisible star of the trilogy, with many arguing that his work should be considered for major acting awards. Yet here the controversy began. Could an actor hidden behind digital rendering be recognized as an actor in the traditional sense? The Academy remained silent, treating Gollum as a triumph of special effects rather than performance. This should have been Serkis's coronation, the moment he stepped into Hollywood's A-list alongside his co-stars. While Viggo Mortensen, Ian McKellen, and Orlando Bloom saw their profiles rise, Serkis remained trapped inside the very technology he had helped to pioneer. The industry celebrated the spectacle, but neglected the man who gave it life. Instead of being embraced as one of the defining actors of his generation, Serkis was labeled the motion capture guy, a technical curiosity rather than a leading man. The irony is piercing. Gollum was perhaps the most unforgettable character in a trilogy filled with legends, and yet the actor behind him became invisible. For Serkis, the role was both a breakthrough and a prison, proof of his genius, but also the beginning of a career-long struggle against the industry's refusal to see motion capture as equal to flesh and blood acting. It was the spark that should have lit the path to superstardom, but instead it cast a long shadow over his journey as one of Hollywood's most underrated actors. Beyond Gollum, King Kong, 2005, and Kong as Tragedy. Fresh off his transformative work as Gollum, Andy Serkis faced another challenge that seemed impossible, breathing humanity into a 25-foot monster. Peter Jackson once again turned to him for the 2005 remake of King Kong, entrusting Serkis not only with a supporting human role, but also with the soul of the film itself, Kong. What Serkis achieved was not a special effect, but a Shakespearean tragedy. Beneath the layers of digital fur and thunderous roars, he crafted a creature of startling vulnerability. Every movement was deliberate. The way Kong's massive shoulders slumped in loneliness, the tenderness in his gestures toward Ann Darrow, the simmering rage when threatened by humanity's cruelty. Serkis gave the giant ape a beating heart, and in doing so, he turned a spectacle of destruction into a story of love, loss, and the brutality of exploitation. Critics recognized the achievement. Reviews hailed Kong as more than a monster. He was a character of depth, one whose downfall carried the weight of myth. Yet once again the applause stopped short of Serkis himself. The spotlight fell on Naomi Watts for her luminous performance, on Jack Black for his flamboyant energy, and on Peter Jackson for his grand vision. Kong became iconic, but the man who was Kong remained in the background. It wasn't a small project either. Peter Jackson's King Kong earned over $550 million worldwide, one of the top-grossing films of 2005. Audiences came expecting spectacle, but they left talking about emotion. Online forums and fan magazines of the time noted how Kong felt more human than most of the cast, a testament to Serkis's performance hidden beneath digital fur. And yet, in that same year, Christian Bale turned Batman Begins into his A-list coronation, while Heath Ledger's transformative turn in Brokeback Mountain cemented his status as one of the most fearless actors of his generation. Both roles catapulted their actors to the top of Hollywood. Serkis, who delivered something equally daring in a film that conquered the global box office, remained invisible. The industry cheered Kong's tragedy, but not the man who made us feel it. The injustice becomes starker when compared to Serkis's contemporaries. Around the same time, Christian Bale's metamorphosis in Batman Begins and Heath Ledger's chilling turn in Brokeback Mountain propelled them instantly into the A-list. Each role became a coronation. Serkis, meanwhile, was delivering performances no less daring, inhabiting not just a character but an entire species, yet he was treated as if he were part of the software, not the craft. Hollywood embraced Kong as a marvel of visual effects, while forgetting that it was an actor's pain, tenderness, and rage animating every frame. And so, Serkis's paradox deepened. He had proven, twice in succession, that he could create characters who moved audiences to awe and tears. But instead of being elevated, he was hidden further behind the digital curtain. The industry cheered for the monsters, but not for the man who made them human. It was another reminder of why Andy Serkis, despite reshaping the very language of modern cinema, remained locked in the shadows as one of Hollywood's most underrated actors. The Apes Revolution, Caesar as Shakespearean Tragedy, 2011 to 2017. If Gollum made Andy Serkis a pioneer and King Kong proved his artistry was no accident, then Caesar in Rise of the Planet of the Apes, 2011, and its sequels should have obliterated any remaining doubts. This was not just another motion capture experiment. It was the creation of a fully realized protagonist, a character whose arc unfolded across 3 films with the depth and gravitas of Shakespearean tragedy. From the first moment Caesar appeared on screen, a young chimp raised by humans, caught between 2 worlds, Serkis imbued him with emotional clarity that transcended species. The tilt of his head, the flicker of his eyes, the hesitant gestures of a being learning to communicate. These were not the tricks of technology, but the instincts of an actor working at the height of his craft. Caesar was not just believable. He was deeply relatable. By the time Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, 2014, arrived, Caesar had grown into a leader, burdened by the impossible weight of guiding his kind toward survival while avoiding the very cruelty that humans had inflicted upon him. Serkis portrayed this conflict with a quiet intensity that rivaled any live-action performance of the decade. His voice, layered with guttural strength yet tinged with sorrow, turned Caesar into more than a digital figure. He became a moral compass, a tragic hero wrestling with power, loyalty, and betrayal. The culmination came in War for the Planet of the Apes, 2017. Here, Caesar's journey reached operatic heights, a leader tested by grief, vengeance, and sacrifice. Serkis played him not as a fantasy creature, but as a war-weary king in the vein of Lear or Macbeth, a figure whose struggle was both epic and intimate. The final scenes, Caesar wounded, watching his people find freedom as he quietly succumbs, carried the weight of a human epic. Audiences mourned him as they would a flesh-and-blood icon, forgetting that he was, in cinematic terms, only an ape. Critics were unanimous. Serkis had delivered one of the great performances of the 21st century. Outlets like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter hailed his work as groundbreaking, calling Caesar a character of heartbreaking humanity. Directors and actors across the industry praised him, with Matt Reeves, the director of Dawn and War, insisting that Serkis's work was no different from the greatest live-action performances in history. Peter Jackson himself had said years earlier that Gollum could never have existed without Serkis's acting at the core. The technology was secondary. What made Gollum real was Andy. Elijah Wood echoed the sentiment, describing how acting opposite Serkis on set gave Frodo and Gollum's scenes their raw intensity. Woody Harrelson, who played Caesar's nemesis in War for the Planet of the Apes, admitted that Serkis's commitment was so fierce it often left him shaken. You forget he's in a suit. You just believe the character. These voices, from directors and co-stars alike, underline what critics already knew. It was not the computers that made Caesar immortal. It was Serkis. And yet, when awards season arrived, the silence was deafening. No Oscar nominations, no Golden Globes, no coronation. Hollywood's refusal to acknowledge motion capture acting reached its cruelest peak here. While lesser performances in more conventional roles were showered with accolades, Serkis was once again left out of the conversation. His work as Caesar was every bit as transformative as Daniel Day-Lewis in There Will Be Blood or Joaquin Phoenix in Joker, yet the industry treated it as a technical achievement rather than an acting triumph. This was not just a personal snub. It was a statement. The very system that should have recognized Serkis as one of the greatest actors of his generation instead relegated him to the margins of innovation. The trilogy proved beyond doubt that performance capture was not a gimmick, but a vessel for profound storytelling. And Serkis proved that he could carry an entire franchise on his shoulders. But the world, once again, applauded the spectacle and ignored the man who made it possible. With Caesar, Andy Serkis did more than create an unforgettable character. He exposed the blind spot of Hollywood itself, its inability to see beyond traditional definitions of acting, its reluctance to expand the boundaries of recognition. And in that blind spot, Serkis's brilliance continued to burn, unseen yet undeniable. It was his greatest triumph and his most painful reminder of why he remains one of the most underrated actors in modern cinema. Hollywood's reluctance. Why he's still underrated. By the time Andy Serkis had completed Caesar's epic journey, he should have been impossible to ignore. Few actors in modern history had carried a franchise with such consistency, emotional power, and cultural impact. Yet when the dust settled, Serkis found himself in a strangely familiar position, praised in interviews, celebrated in think pieces, but absent from the pantheon of names Hollywood likes to anoint. Why? The answer lies in Hollywood's reluctance to adjust its own lens of recognition. The industry still clings to an outdated hierarchy. Real acting is defined by the unmediated face, the visible tear, the raw body on screen. Anything else is considered augmentation, a trick of technology. And so, while Benedict Cumberbatch's voice alone could earn him awards attention in The Grinch, and Tom Hardy's masked growl as Bane became iconic despite his face being obscured, Serkis's motion capture artistry was continually dismissed as a technical novelty. The irony is sharp. The man who expanded the very definition of performance was denied acknowledgement precisely because he dared to move beyond tradition. But the problem runs deeper than awards politics. Serkis also lacked the narrative Hollywood craves, the marketable story of stardom. He was not the suave leading man to grace magazine covers, nor the eccentric genius who fed the celebrity machine with sound bites and scandals. He was, and remains, a craftsman. Someone who talks less about fame and more about process, less about image and more about the work itself. In a culture obsessed with celebrity, that integrity became another invisible cloak. And yet, this is what makes him the very embodiment of an underrated actor. Serkis represents a paradox. Everyone has seen his work, but almost no one has seen him. His performances have shaped pop culture on a seismic scale, yet his name doesn't circulate with the same reverence as Cumberbatch, Hardy, or even Ruffalo, who, ironically, owes part of his Hulk performance to the door Serkis kicked open. What hurts most is that the erasure is systemic, not accidental. When awards bodies sidestep his performances, they are sending a message about what counts as acting and what doesn't. When studios market the spectacle but not the performer, they reduce artistry to pixels. And when audiences walk away remembering Gollum, Kong, Caesar, or Snoke, but not Serkis, the cycle of invisibility continues. For Andy Serkis, this has been both a burden and a badge of honor. A burden because the recognition he deserves has been repeatedly withheld, but a badge of honor because, despite Hollywood's reluctance, he has never compromised his pursuit of truth within the craft. He continues to prove, role after role, that acting is not about being seen, but about making others believe. And that is the essence of why he remains one of the great underrated actors of our time. A man whose genius is everywhere, yet whose spotlight is still withheld by the very industry he helped transform. Expanding horizons, director, producer, live-action roles. For most actors, being typecast is a career hazard. For Andy Serkis, it was something stranger. He wasn't typecast into characters, but into technology. After Gollum, Kong, and Caesar, Hollywood seemed to see him only as the motion capture guy. But Serkis refused to let that box define him. Instead, he broadened his canvas, stepping into live-action roles, taking on directing, and even shaping projects as a producer. His most visible break from digital skin came with Marvel as Ulysses Klaue in Avengers Age of Ultron 2015 and later Black Panther 2018. Serkis was finally just himself, flesh and bone, no computer rendering. And what he delivered was electric. Klaue was unhinged, unpredictable, hilarious, and terrifying all at once, a villain who stole scenes even while surrounded by titans of the Marvel franchise. For many, it was a revelation, proof that Serkis could dominate the screen without wires or sensors. Yet even here, he was treated as supporting flavor, a side character to enrich the world around Black Panther, rather than as a central force the film revolved around. Beyond acting, Serkis also dared to reinvent himself as a storyteller. In 2017, he directed Breathe, a tender biopic starring Andrew Garfield and Claire Foy, proving his sensitivity behind the camera. A year later, he tackled Rudyard Kipling's Mowgli, Legend of the Jungle, 2018, a darker reimagining of the Jungle Book that leaned heavily into his fascination with blending human drama and digital performance. Critics were divided, but what no one could deny was Serkis's ambition. He was not content to be remembered as a tool of technology, but as an artist shaping narratives. As a producer, he backed smaller projects like Boiling Point, 2021, Philip Barantini's one-take kitchen drama starring Stephen Graham. The film went on to critical acclaim, and Serkis's involvement underscored his commitment to elevating bold, risk-taking storytelling. It's a detail often overlooked. Even when he isn't the face on screen, Serkis is working to reshape the industry from the inside out. And yet, here too, the pattern emerges. When actors like Ben Affleck or Bradley Cooper step into directing, their careers are celebrated as reinventions, lauded with awards and glossy profiles. Serkis, despite equal courage and ambition, remains caught in Hollywood's blind spot. His successes behind the camera are acknowledged, but rarely amplified. His live-action performances praised, but not lionized. What ties all of this together is the same paradox that has followed him since Gollum. Andy Serkis delivers every time, yet his contributions are consistently framed as secondary. He is the spark, not the headline, the force that elevates stories, not the name that sells them. And in that tension lies the essence of his place among underrated actors, a man who has proven mastery across every corner of the craft, and yet is still waiting for the world to give him the recognition it so freely offers others. Even the galaxy far, far away could not change his fate. When Disney revived Star Wars, Serkis was cast as Supreme Leader Snoke, the shadowy villain of a new trilogy that grossed billions worldwide. For most actors, stepping into such a franchise would guarantee mainstream recognition, the kind that cements you as a household name. Yet once again, Serkis was swallowed by the digital veil. The marketing pushed Daisy Ridley, Adam Driver, and John Boyega to global stardom, while Serkis, hidden behind CGI, was barely mentioned. Snoke loomed over the trilogy as a terrifying presence, but the actor who gave him life was treated as if he were part of the software, not the soul of the performance. Even inside the biggest franchise on Earth, Andy Serkis remained the invisible man. Comparisons. When others took the spotlight. The easiest way to understand Andy Serkis's underrated status is to place him side by side with the actors of his generation who did receive Hollywood's full embrace. What emerges is not a gap in talent, but a stark contrast in how the industry chooses its icons. Take Benedict Cumberbatch. His breakout in Sherlock, 2010, gave him an instantly recognizable persona, the brilliant, aloof intellectual. From there, the doors of Marvel swung wide open with Doctor Strange, 2016, and his prestige credentials were sealed with Oscar-nominated performances like The Power of the Dog, 2021. Andy Serkis, meanwhile, in that very same year, had just concluded his monumental work as Caesar and directed high-profile projects. Yet while Cumberbatch was being packaged as both blockbuster star and awards darling, Serkis was still being described with the qualifier, the motion capture guy. Consider Tom Hardy. His feral turn in Bronson, 2008, and his transformation into Bane in The Dark Knight Rises, 2012, made him one of the most bankable actors in the world. Hardy's physical intensity became a brand, his name a guarantee of box office heat. And yet, Serkis had shown equal, if not greater, physical mastery in embodying both Kong and Caesar, roles that demanded not only discipline, but total reinvention of movement. The difference? Hardy's face was always visible, his persona always marketable. Serkis's genius was hidden, and so Hollywood treated it as less. Even Mark Ruffalo, a fine actor in his own right, owes part of his Marvel-era Hulk performance to the groundwork Serkis had already laid in motion capture. Studios leaned on Serkis's pioneering techniques to make Ruffalo's Hulk possible. But when awards chatter or media profiles surface, it is Ruffalo's name, not Serkis's, that garners attention. Serkis, the innovator, remains the ghost in the machine. The imbalance is glaring when it comes to recognition. When Daniel Day-Lewis disappeared into Daniel Plainview in There Will Be Blood, critics called it genius. When Joaquin Phoenix twisted himself into Arthur Fleck in Joker, he was crowned with an Oscar. Andy Serkis transformed himself into beings that were not even human, carrying the emotional weight of entire franchises, and yet the industry dismissed him as a technician rather than an actor. His work was as transformative, as fearless, as emotionally shattering as any of his peers. But the narrative of stardom never shifted toward him. And that is the cruel irony. Hollywood has always celebrated actors who vanish into their roles, who surprise audiences with each transformation. But when Andy Serkis does it, the very perfection of his craft makes him invisible. The audience remembers Gollum, Kong, and Caesar as if they were real. And in that illusion, they forget the man who gave them life. This is the tragedy and the triumph of Andy Serkis. To stand equal to the most celebrated actors of his era, yet remain absent from the same spotlight. It is not a failure of talent, but of recognition. And it is why, even after redefining what acting can be, he is still one of the greatest underrated actors of our time. Legacy in progress, the invisible giant. Andy Serkis's story is not one of fading into obscurity, but of building a legacy brick by brick, often in silence, often in the shadows, yet always with an impact that echoes louder than the headlines he never received. Few actors can claim to have reshaped the very language of cinema, but Serkis did exactly that. His work did not just create memorable characters. It redefined how audiences, directors, and even technology itself approach the art of performance. Think of it this way. Before Serkis, motion capture was a novelty, a tool used to add spectacle. After Serkis, it became a respected method of storytelling, capable of producing characters as emotionally resonant as any live-action performance. Every actor who has since stepped into a performance capture suit, from Zoe Saldana in Avatar to Josh Brolin as Thanos, walks through a door that Serkis forced open. He is not simply part of cinema history, he is one of its architects. And yet, what makes his legacy so compelling is not just the innovation, but the integrity. Serkis has never treated motion capture as a gimmick. For him, it is another instrument, like lighting or costume, a means to bring truth to a character. Whether as Caesar, Gollum, Kong, or Snoke, his performances remind us that the essence of acting is not the surface, but the soul. Even when hidden behind pixels, his humanity bleeds through. That is why audiences weep for Caesar or feel pity for Gollum, because Serkis gives them not effects, but emotion. Beyond technology, his influence stretches into storytelling itself. Through his company, the Imaginarium Studios, He has championed projects that push the boundaries of performance capture and nurtured new generations of actors and technicians. As a director, he has proven he can guide narratives with both intimacy, breathe, and spectacle. Venom, let there be carnage. As a producer, he uplifts daring cinema like boiling point, ensuring that voices from the margins find their place on screen. In every direction he turns, Serkis leaves fingerprints that may not always be visible, but are undeniably vital. Still, the paradox lingers. For all his achievements, his name is not etched into the mainstream consciousness in the way Hardy, Cumberbatch, or even Ruffalo's are. His genius has been absorbed into the fabric of cinema, but rarely credited at its true weight. That is the quiet tragedy of Andy Serkis's career. To be indispensable, but under-celebrated. To be a giant, yet invisible. Serkis himself has spoken about this paradox with quiet frustration. People think it's all digital, but every smile, every tear, every heartbeat you see on screen, that's me. The technology only translates it. His words cut to the core of his legacy. What Hollywood dismissed as software was, in truth, pure acting. Sweat, breath, and emotion captured frame by frame. And through the Imaginarium, Serkis continues to fight so that future generations of actors using performance capture will not remain invisible in the way he has. And perhaps that is why his legacy feels so unfinished, because recognition is still catching up to him. His story reminds us that greatness does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through characters we think of as real, forgetting the actor who gave them breath. That is why Andy Serkis matters. Because long after awards fade and Hollywood trends shift, the characters he created will endure, and with them, the undeniable truth that one of the greatest actors of our era has always been standing right in front of us, unseen, the greatness that Hollywood overlooked. Andy Serkis has given cinema some of its most unforgettable figures. Creatures who breathed, raged, loved, and broke our hearts as though they were flesh and blood. Yet paradoxically, the more fully he vanished into them, the more the world forgot the man behind the transformation. While Hollywood crowned others for far lesser feats, Serkis carried entire franchises on his shoulders, reshaped the art of acting, and still found himself overlooked. But greatness does not always wear the crown it deserves. Sometimes it lives in the shadows, in the quiet revolution of an artist who changes the game without demanding applause. Andy Serkis is that artist. He is not simply the motion capture guy. He is one of the most daring performers of our generation, a craftsman who proved that acting is not about the surface we see, but the truth we feel. Perhaps history will take longer to catch up with him. Perhaps Hollywood will one day recognize what audiences already know in their hearts, that Gollum, Caesar, and Kong are not just triumphs of technology, but triumphs of performance. Until then, Serkis remains the invisible giant, a reminder that the most extraordinary talents are often the ones the spotlight misses. So we leave the question to you. Do you believe Andy Serkis deserves to stand among the greats? Share your thoughts, because sometimes recognition begins not with Hollywood, but with us.